mal schnell genug. So, ich muss vornehmen, weil ich bin nicht gleich hinsetzen. So I'm going to talk about Ember.SimpleAuth. My name is Marco. I have a website at simpleapps.com. And Ember.SimpleAuth is basically a library that helps you build authentication functionality with Ember.js app. It's really not a plugin that you just load in your app and then it does everything for you and everything automatically works. It's really a library that helps you build the user login enforcement of a user being logged in to access something and so on. And it tries to be really unobtrusive. It tries to not dictate anything with regards to application structure, route names, whatever. So it tries to be it basically wants to work with every application. I just wanted to talk about terminology real quick. So basically it does two things. It does authentication and authorization. And authentication is basically you verify that the user is who he pretends to be. And then authorization is where you use that information, where you know who the user is. You use that information to find out whether the user is allowed to do something he wants to do, like access a certain page or whatever. So what does Ember.SimpleAuth do? Basically, the first thing it does, it provides a client-side session, and that session is always available throughout the Ember app. So it's injected into our routes, controllers, views, and models. And the most important function it provides is it lets you check whether the session is authenticated. Like the session will always exist, regardless of whether it's authenticated or not. And that's the main feature basically that it provides. It lets you check whether you have an authenticated session or not. And it keeps all the data and makes it accessible, all the data that basically makes up that authenticatedness. So in most cases, that data that says whether the user is authenticated or not would be some kind of token. And then it has functionality that helps you to authenticate and to invalidate the session. So that would be like log in, log out via pluggable strategies. So it can support multiple authentication mechanisms like regular login with credentials, external providers like Facebook or Google or whatever. And then it has functionality that makes it easier to enforce the session to be authenticated for certain routes. So if you define a route as requiring authentication, then when the user accesses it without having an authenticated session, it would redirect to a certain route that you can define. So there would usually be the login screen. And what it also does, it synchronizes that session over all tabs and windows of the application that you have open, which of course is especially useful for the logout case. So where you have two tabs of the same application open, maybe you're displaying some sort of sensitive data, then you log out in one window and the other window or tab still shows that sensitive data. That's obviously not something you want. And it also persists the session that basically makes it survive a page reload. So if you reload the page, you don't have to log in again, but it's all still there. You have the same state basically. And then it also has functionality that injects authorization information into server requests, so that you have something on the server side that helps you figure out whether that request is coming from an authenticated user or not, maybe which user the request is coming from. And of course, that that information that's injected in the server request is the information you acquired from somewhere when the session was being authenticated. So I think that maybe sounds quite complex. So I have prepared a demo to show what it really how it looks in practice. Is that readable? Or should I make it larger? Like that? So that's a very simple Ember app. It's really just one file that has all the stuff. First thing is, of course, the layout. Or maybe let me show you how it looks on the browser first. It's really just that. It's a simple one-page app. You have a protected page that redirects you to the login page, and when you log in, you get to access that page, and if you log out, you're redirected back to the root of the application.
Does it track state changes?
Sorry?
Does it track state changes? So if the server pushed, so if the session is expired, for example?
If the session that's not supported by the default strategies that are included with the library, but it would be pretty simple to implement that with your own strategies that you can provide for authentication and for authorization. But I'm going to show that later. I first want to show that simple example, and then I get to like all the flexibility stuff that's included later. So the application is really simple. Like you have the link for the home, you have the link to the protected page here, and then you, depending on whether the session is authenticated or not, you're either displaying the logout or login button. And the logout button just triggers the invalidate session action, and the login button links to the login route. Then here you have the outlet, you have that like link at the bottom. The index page, just unless the session is authenticated, it shows information on how to log in. And then you have the login window, the login form that has two fields, one for identification and one for password, then the submit button, and it triggers the authenticate action on submit. And that's the protected page. It just says this is a protected page. You can't see that when you're not logged in. So the actual code that you need to get that functionality that I just showed you is, of course, besides including the Ember.SimpleAuth library, is that you first have to set up Ember.SimpleAuth in an initializer. Basically, that's where it creates the session and injects the session via Ember's dependency injection mechanism into all the routes and controllers and models and views. Then you create the application. In this case, I'm setting the root URL because it's like some HTML file and not the like root path. Then I have the login route and the protected route. And then this is the part where I'm actually using or including the functionality provided by Ember.SimpleAuth. The application route includes the application route mixin, the login controller includes the login controller mixin, and the protected route includes the authenticated route mixin. So that's really all you need to do to get that simple functionality that I just showed. And you already, with that little code, you already have that the session persistence. For example, if I log in again, then if I reload, which takes some time, if it would reload, then you would see that it's actually still. Let me that it's still authenticated. Let me just try it again. I can probably not, like you see, I'm including jQuery and stuff from the internet. So that would be bad if that didn't work, because try a different Wi-Fi.
One question, how do you share the state, when you log out at the other?
I would show later. I just want to. Okay, now it works. So you see, I'm reloading the page, and it the user is still logged in. And if I open a second tab, the user is also logged in here. And if I log out here, then it did not work. So let me try again whether we get that to work. So I'm logging in here, I'm logged in here, and I log out here, and I'm logged out here. So I don't know what that problem was before, maybe some bug, but that's how it should work. Okay, let me get back to the presentation. Yeah, so I wanted to talk about flexibility, that's what all the questions were about. Like I said, you have the authentication mechanism that authenticates the session, and then you have the authorization mechanism where you use that information that you get when you authenticated the session. So you have many authentication mechanisms per application, or while the session is only authenticated with one mechanism at any time. Like you can either log in with your username and password, or you can log in with Facebook, or you can log in with Google or whatever. But if the session is authenticated, it's authenticated with one concrete authentication mechanism. And you usually have only one authorization mechanism, because you usually have only one REST backend, like that's your Rails app or whatever, that you're making requests against, and that would of course always expect the same kind of authorization data to be included in a header or with some other mechanism. And there's only one store that persists the session. Like you can use either the local storage store or the cookie store, where it basically persists the session in session cookies, or you can use like an ephemeral store that saves all the session information in memory, and that's of course not persistent then, but that's useful for testing, for example, where you don't want to actually want something to be persistent, because it might affect other tests or so. The default authenticator included in the library implements RFC 6749, that's OAuth 2, and it specifically it implements the resource owner password credentials grant type. That's basically you have a username and a password, and you exchange that against an access token. So that's probably the most simple grant typing defined in OAuth 2. And the default authorizer implements RFC 650. That's the bearer tokens specification, where you just, in your request, you include that authorization header. You say it's a bearer token, and then comes that token that the RFC 6749 authentication mechanism acquired from the server previously. But it's also really simple to implement custom authenticators and authorizers. For example, you could, like the RFC 6749 authentication mechanism defines that you make a post request against /token on the server side, and like it's form encoded data and stuff. That's all defined. But you could really easily implement something, for example, where you have like a session endpoint that picked some sort of JSON data or whatever. And I have a demo that shows how you would write an authenticator that authenticates the user against Facebook, for example. So that's example 7. So basically, the HTML and the handlebar templates are the same as in the first example. You have the header menu, you have the login, logout buttons, depending on whether the session is authenticated or not. You have that index page that says you can authenticate with Facebook. Then you have a protected page that's only accessible if you're authenticated, and then the code, of course, is a bit different. First, you set up the Facebook SDK. That's like specific to the Facebook SDK. Then what you're doing is you're implementing your own authenticator. So if you want to use that later, you have to first register that with the Ember.js dependency injection container. So you're just saying authenticators. Facebook is your app Facebook authenticator. And then you're using that string later on to say, I want to use that authenticator. This is all the same, creates the application, root URL for the router, protected page route. Of course, you don't have a login route because you're using the Facebook authentication JavaScript SDK, which doesn't require a certain view in your application. Then the authenticator basically just has 3 methods that it needs to implement. You're just extending the base authenticator that Ember.SimpleAuth provides, and then you have to implement the restore, authenticate, and the optional invalidate method. The first method I want to show is the authenticate, because that's like the method that's called when you click login, or basically when you initiate authentication. Or maybe I just show how it looks first. We have using the cable, that's probably better. Okay, so the page is the same. You have the protected page that you can't access, or that will initiate authentication. And the actual authentication mechanism is that the Facebook SDK opens a new window that shows you a Facebook login screen. So that's basically, if I click login, it does the same thing as if I click or try to transition to the protected page. Both actions would initiate the authentication. And if I log in here, then I'm authenticated, and it lets me access the protected page. So how do I do that in the authenticate method of the authenticator? Basically, the method returns a promise, and if that promise resolves with some data, then the session is going to be authenticated with that data. It's going to save that data in the session object, and the session is going to be authenticated. And if I reject or if that promise rejects, then authentication failed, and the session stays not authenticated. So this is really the Facebook SDK stuff. You get the login status because the user might already be authenticated, like that's this status. And if that's the case, you just resolve that promise that you return, and with that access token you get from the Facebook SDK. If the application is not authorized, you reject. And if the user is not already connected, nor has he forbidden the application to use his profile, then you log the user in. And in this case, I'm making an additional AJAX request to my server application, because you might want to, I think in real applications, you would probably have a mechanism where the client authentication always uses the same token to identify the user. So you would probably want to exchange that Facebook token against your own token. So that's basically what's being done here. It puts the Facebook token to some special URL, and then it resolves the property with. Yeah, of course, that's actually wrong. Here, what do you see? It should actually be the access token you receive from your own application. So basically, you're exchanging that. If that AJAX request fails, then it just rejects with the error message, and that's if authentication with Facebook fails, it rejects as well. So that's actually quite simple. The middleware for that is, I think it's just dummy middleware in that case. It just doesn't return anything, that doesn't actually exchange the token, but that's where you would find the user for the Facebook token, read the token you want to use, and return that to the client. Then the second method you might want to implement is the invalidate hook that's being invoked when the user logs out. So you might, in most cases, like in the auth 2 case, it's enough to just delete the token in the client to log the user out. You don't have to do anything on the server side, because if the client doesn't have the token, then it's effectively logged out. But the Facebook SDK provides a method to log the user out. I think it deletes the application from the user's Facebook profile. I think that's what it does. So on invalidation, that method is invoked, and that calls that hook on Facebook's side. And if that succeeds, it resolves. If it does not succeed, it rejects. So that means if the invalidate hook returns a rejecting promise, then that basically intercepts session invalidation, and the user will stay logged in. That's probably something you would rarely need, but you could, in theory, block session invalidation, and unless you successfully did some sort of cleanup work. And the third method you have to implement is the restore method. That's invoked then when you reload the page. Then it maybe I can show you how that works actually. Basically, what Ember.SimpleAuth does when you authenticate the session, it can I make that larger? Yeah. It basically possesses the used factory that it used to authenticate the session. So in that case, that's your authenticator's Facebook, and it also possesses all the data that the authenticate method of that authenticator resolved with. So in this case, that's just the access token. For other authenticators, it might also be a user ID or whatever, maybe like username as well, all sorts of things. So when I reload that page now, it gets a new authenticator instance from the dependency injection container, and then passes all additional data that it persists in the store to that authenticator instance and lets the authenticator decide whether that data is sufficient for the session to be authenticated again, so like the user being automatically logged in or not. And in this simple case, it's just if there is an access token that's not empty, then you can assume the user to be logged in. And if not, it rejects, and then the application starts without the user being logged in. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question. Like, how would you solve when you have like very obvious examples when you have like the email on the top right? Can you save also data in this tool?
What do you mean?
Can you also save data? For example, like you display the email on the top right.
Sure.
Does it have a mechanism to like immediately like request like basic data from the server?
Mm-hmm. I mean, you cannot really save objects in there,
Okay.
but you can save atomic data. So I have another example that basically it doesn't save the user's email, but it has an authenticated account. Basically, let me show you the server side first. Where's that? That's version 3. So in this case, I have a authentication endpoint on the server side that's not compliant to Auth 2, but it's a little different. It uses username and password, and it in addition to the access token, it also returns the account ID. So you can immediately, when you authenticated the user, you already know who the user is. So you don't need to save the user the user's data, like the email address you said, but you just save the user ID in the session. So that's the session object, and you just extend that with an account function that watches the account ID, and when that is set, it loads the account for that ID from the store. And the authenticator then, instead of just resolving with the access token, like the Facebook authenticator, it resolves with the access token and the account ID. And then you can in the templates, you can just let me see where it is. You can use the account in the template, and you could just say session account name, because you have the account property in the session, and then the account has like name and email, whatever. And and then in the yeah, but it
It's not a business
it-
one between the prototypes and stuff, yes.
Hmm?
But it's not like the atomic and it's a persistent. It's saved in the cookie.
yeah, but in the cookie it only saves the account ID,
Yeah.
because you don't need to save all the user data, and the ID is sufficient to get the user from the server then, and then you have the username here, like that's the username, some person in that case, and still the local storage only has the used factory, the token, and the ID. Maybe one example I can show is how you would use it with, for example, Ember data, where you actually make requests to the server, where you have to know on the server side whether the user is authenticated or not. So for example, you have some sort of list of posts where you want to require authentication to be able to read these posts from the server. You log in, and then you're allowed to see the posts, and then if you look at the network request being made, you see that it included that authorization bearer token to identify the user. Let me get back to the talk. I have some, need to change this because I have some notes. So the outlook for that library is to right now the default authenticator and the default authorizer are included in the library, and as they are maybe not used by everyone, I would like to extract them, and so you would include the base library in your application, and then maybe you include the OAuth 2 authenticator and some custom authorizer. You don't include the authenticator because you have your own Facebook authenticator, whatever. So like you don't have to load so much code that you don't actually need. There's also a pull request with a device-compatible authenticator that's not yet merged because I want to have that mechanism that you like can load only the libs that you actually need for your application first. And of course, I would like if many people would provide their own authenticators and authorizers. So there's maybe like, at some point there could be like a library of authenticators. So you have like one for Facebook that's more or less ready to go, one for Twitter and whatever. Yeah, I have some resources. Like there's an extensive README that has like lots of documentation and lots of examples. Then there's also the API documentation, and there are also links to sample applications in the README that I think one uses Ember AppKit to like show how that would work. And then all the examples, I think I showed 3. There's 7 in the repository with instructions on how to run them. It's really simple. It's just a simple task in the grunt file, and then you can run them on your local host. Yeah, and that's it. So if there are no questions, then that's it.